flames everywhere. I mean, just a $60 million rocket disintegrating midair, painting the whole Texas sky in this massive streak of orange.
Yeah, and on the ground, the crowd is just dead silent in horror.
Exactly. Years of engineering, millions of dollars in venture capital, decades of ambition just gone in seconds. But if you look inside the SpaceX control room in that exact moment, people aren't panicking.
No, the CEO doesn't even flinch.
Right. In the background, senior engineers are actually smiling. And on the surface, this sounds like, I don't know, a heavily rebranded Silicon Valley fad for failure. They even have this sterile corporate euphemism for it, right? Rapid unscheduled disassembly.
Rapid unscheduled disassembly, yeah.
So I want to get right to the pragmatic core of this for this deep dive, because I'm playing devil's advocate here. How exactly does burning tens of millions of dollars in the sky translate to gaining a competitive advantage, securing more runway, or building a sustainable business?
Well, because what you just described isn't a fad, and it certainly isn't a failure in the traditional sense. It's actually a highly optimized system architecture.
System architecture. By blowing things up.
Yeah. The smiling engineers in that control room aren't celebrating the loss of hardware. They are celebrating massive data acquisition. And we're looking at the ultimate secret behind almost every major technological leap of the last 2 decades here.
Okay, so the goal of this deep dive isn't just to geek out about rockets.
No, not at all. It's to extract the uncomfortable truths about elite high performance, applied psychology, and true innovation. We are looking at how to optimize the mental ROI, the return on investment, of failure.
Okay, mental ROI. To figure out how they pulled this off, we're pulling from a stack of sources today. Leaked aerospace engineering memos, behavioral psychology journals analyzing risk aversion, even commodity market analyses breaking down the raw material costs of spaceflight. But I'll be honest, I'm still highly skeptical.
I get it.
Blowing things up as a business model just seems fundamentally counterintuitive to anyone who has ever, managed a P&L.
It requires a complete paradigm shift. Think of it like agile software development, but applied to thousands of pounds of highly explosive custom machine metal.
Right.
The reason most people, and I'm speaking directly to you listening to this right now, the reason you never reach your full potential is because we are actively conditioned by our environments to avoid the exact thing that this organization sprints toward. We avoid failure. We hide flaws. SpaceX weaponizes those flaws.
Let's contextualize that, though, because before this company came along, space exploration was the exclusive, completely untouchable domain of massive governments.
Oh, absolutely. NASA had the monopoly.
The military-industrial complex held the contracts, and they definitely were not in the business of blowing things up on purpose.
And that is the core contrast you have to understand. If we look at the state of the traditional aerospace industry in the early 2000s, it was essentially grounded. The industry moved incredibly slowly. And why? Because it operated on a foundation of political fear.
Political fear and a very specific economic incentive structure, right?
Exactly. Traditional aerospace operated on cost-plus contracts, meaning if a project was delayed, the contractor just billed the government for the extra time.
Must be nice.
Right. But if a rocket exploded, that triggered a congressional hearing. So every single test had to be absolutely perfect before it ever left the launch pad.
Zero room for error.
Zero. No explosions meant no bad PR, but it also meant zero iterative learning. It was stagnation by perfectionism.
And into that highly bureaucratic environment walks a tech billionaire who the establishment basically viewed as an eccentric software guy with a dangerous hobby.
Yeah, claiming he's going to build reusable rockets and colonize Mars.
With no aerospace background, no factory, no team. I mean, the traditional experts literally laughed at him. But let's examine the actual track record outlined in the sources, because the reality of those early days was brutal.
It really was.
Look at the story of the Falcon 1 back in 2006. This is where I struggle to see the genius of this mental ROI. They spend 6 years doing this grueling work on a remote island in the Pacific. Hundreds of people putting their lives on hold.
Living in tents, basically.
Yeah, living in tents. And they finally launch. 60 seconds after liftoff, a corroded aluminum nut fails. A fuel leak causes the entire vehicle to spiral out of control and crash straight into the ocean.
A completely devastating loss, both emotionally and financially.
But it gets worse. Falcon 2 launches. This time, slosh in the fuel tank throws off the trajectory. Another explosion. Different engineering bug. Same absolute heartbreak.
The team is completely drained at this point.
Completely drained. The financial press is already drafting the company's obituary, so they scrape together literally everything they have for Falcon 3. The stakes are absolute. If Falcon 3 fails, the company is insolvent. Done. So they launch. There's a timing issue with the stage separation. The rocket rear-ends itself and disintegrates mid-flight. 3 rockets,
Yeah.
3 explosions. The company is completely broke. The dream is mathematically over.
On paper, yes.
So where is the competitive advantage in burning through your runway and nearly destroying your own company? Seriously.
It comes down to data-driven optimism versus emotional despair. When that third rocket blew up, the traditional industry assumed they were dead. But the internal reaction was entirely different.
How so?
The leadership looked at the telemetry data coming off those doomed flights and stated a simple, objective fact. They said, "We just learned more from these 3 failures than NASA did in a decade of paper simulations."
Was that just spin, though? Just blind arrogance?
No, it wasn't. It was the realization that the iteration loop, although brutally expensive, was working exactly as intended. They were buying proprietary data that no one else in the world had.
Buying data at the cost of the entire company's existence? I mean, that is a hell of a gamble.
But the architecture of that strategy paid off. The highly specific data harvested from the staging failure of Flight 3 fed directly into the software and hardware updates for Flight 4.
Okay.
And just weeks later, against all odds and running on absolute financial fumes, the 4th rocket reaches orbit. Engineers who were literally packing up their desks are crying tears of joy.
And that single success proved the architecture worked. It instantly won them a massive NASA commercial resupply contract worth hundreds of millions of dollars. It saved the company.
It did. But here's the pivot point of the whole philosophy. After they secured the funding and succeeded, did they lock in the blueprints and stop taking risks?
I mean, any rational board of directors would say, great, we figured it out, let's freeze the design, standardize the manufacturing, and never risk our profit margins on an explosion again.
But they did the exact opposite. They doubled down. They scaled the risk. They built failure into their daily operational system. Every new launch vehicle, every engine design cycle, the prototype, from that point on was purposefully pushed to its absolute structural limits until it broke.
Fast, publicly, and painfully.
Because every single explosion on an isolated test pad in Texas eliminates thousands of hypothetical, unrecoverable explosions in the future. The fundamental lesson here is about the speed of iteration. The faster the feedback loop, the faster progress becomes an absolute inevitability.
Okay, I follow the logic. But knowing rockets are cheap to build on paper or that failure yields data doesn't magically manifest a working spacecraft.
Sure.
You still have to engineer the thing, you still have to pay for the materials, and the sources point to a very specific mental model that allowed them to survive those early days. First principles thinking.
Yes, this is crucial.
Most people, especially in traditional corporate strategy, rely on cognitive biases. We reason by analogy, we look at what our competitors are doing, we look at industry benchmarks, and we just try to optimize the margins by maybe 5 or 10%.
Because reasoning by analogy is safe. It's how you protect your career. You build off the legacy of the old. But first principles thinking bypasses those cognitive biases entirely. It is a physics-based approach to problem solving.
Meaning you strip it down to the basics.
Right. It demands that you ask, what are the fundamental, undeniable physical truths of this problem? And then you rebuild your solution from scratch, refusing to accept any legacy assumption that isn't bound by the laws of physics.
And the sources outline a brilliant concrete example of this, which they call the 2% rule. The established aerospace giants like Boeing and Lockheed told this new company that rockets were just inherently unchangeably expensive. A single launch vehicle costs hundreds of millions of dollars. That was the accepted industry analogy.
But the founder used first principles to break it down. If you look at the source material, he literally took a spreadsheet and priced out the physical raw materials.
Like what makes up a rocket?
Exactly. You have aerospace-grade aluminum alloys, titanium, copper, and carbon fiber. He looked at the actual commodity market prices for those raw materials on the London Metal Exchange.
And when he ran the math, he realized the physical atoms making up the rocket only accounted for about 2% of the retail price the government was paying.
Which is a staggering realization, because if the raw materials are only 2%, what is the other 98%?
Legacy manufacturing processes, bureaucratic overhead, and subcontractors layering margin on top of subcontractors.
Exactly. And that single realization, bypassing the cognitive bias of that's just how much rockets cost, led directly to the decision to vertically integrate. They brought the manufacturing in-house.
They built their own motherboards, welded their own tanks, wrote their own software.
Yes. And this led to the development of reusable rockets and cost reductions that the entire global aerospace industry thought were literally impossible. He wasn't chasing success in the traditional corporate sense. He was chasing fundamental understanding. And failure was simply the fastest, most efficient vehicle to get to that understanding.
Hold on. First principle sounds brilliant if you have billions in venture capital to burn and a private test facility. But reasoning by analogy is how normal professionals survive. We follow established best practices at our jobs so we don't get fired.
Right, self-preservation.
We don't touch a hot stove because we saw someone else get burned. So for someone listening right now who doesn't have a massive financial safety net, how does this translate to gaining a competitive advantage in their own life or career?
That is the critical psychological hurdle.
Yeah.
And to understand it, we have to look at the incentive structures you, the listener, operate under every day.
Let's break that down.
Think about the traditional corporate world or even school. We are conditioned to view failure as career suicide. A failed product launch or a botched marketing campaign in a traditional Fortune 500 company means someone is losing their job.
Definitely.
The incentive structure of middle management is entirely built around hiding flaws, deflecting blame, and maintaining the status quo. You get promoted for not making mistakes.
You're penalized for the exact experimental behavior that leads to breakthroughs.
Precisely. So we grow up into professionals who are deeply emotionally risk-averse. We avoid running experiments in our careers because we are driven by the fear of professional embarrassment, rather than a hunger for objective truth.
So we're optimizing for safety, not progress.
But this engineering philosophy operates on an entirely inverted incentive structure. To achieve elite performance in any competitive field, you have to actively unlearn the corporate conditioning attached to failure. It is rarely a lack of intelligence that stops companies or individuals from innovating. It is their emotional and systemic risk aversion. Treat innovation like a child learning to walk. Fall, adjust, repeat.
Okay, so how do you actually systematize this? Because doing it once in a desperate bid to save the company is luck, but doing it repeatedly at scale is a machine. If you look at their modern vehicles, Starship, Falcon Heavy, these aren't just rockets. They are physical monuments to trial and error.
The contrast between the boardroom cultures is wild. Traditional aerospace relies heavily on computational fluid dynamics. They will spend 5 years and billions of dollars running computer simulations of a single scenario to ensure the blueprint is perfect before cutting a single piece of metal.
It's a software-first approach dictated by fear of public failure.
Exactly. Whereas SpaceX utilizes a hardware-rich approach, it is the physical embodiment of the scientific method applied to heavy engineering. The iteration loop is brutally efficient.
Hypothesis, experiment, result.
Yes. Hypothesis. This new aerodynamic fin design will help the massive stainless steel silo land upright. Experiment. Weld it, fuel it, and launch it. Result. Massive fireball on the landing pad.
Which would end a career at Boeing.
But here, the conclusion is just data. The fin design failed under specific thermal stress at Mach 2. Let's reinforce that specific joint. Repeat the test next month. They don't wait for a perfect peer-reviewed blueprint. They build a half-perfect vehicle, launch it, watch it melt, and design the next iteration based on the raw, undeniable data of reality. It's not magic, it's math.
And the climax of this entire philosophy, the moment that perfectly encapsulates this hardware-rich iteration, happened in March 2021 with the Starship SN10 prototype.
Oh, the sequence of events there is incredible.
It really is. SN10 launches, completes a highly complex aerodynamic belly flop maneuver, ignites its engines, and lands perfectly on the pad for the very first time. The entire world is watching the live stream. The fireballs have finally given way to triumph.
Everyone is cheering.
But then, a methane leak develops. Minutes later, as it's just sitting there, the entire vehicle violently explodes. The massive prototype is completely shredded.
Millions of dollars of hardware just gone in an instant.
Right, you just lost the hardware. How do you explain that to investors? And look at how the company reacts. Instead of despair, instead of PR teams scrambling to draft a crisis management statement hiding the disaster, they lean into it.
They literally posted the video of the explosion on social media with a joke caption.
They tweeted, RIP SN10, honorable discharge. I have to push back here. How is laughing off the destruction of your crowning achievement a valid system architecture?
Because you are looking at the explosion as an endpoint, and they're looking at it as a data node. What's fascinating here is the underlying logic of that public reaction. To the engineers, that explosion wasn't a failure of the mission.
Because it already landed?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The primary objective of SN10 was already achieved. It proved the landing maneuver worked. The explosion that happened minutes later, that was bonus data.
Bonus data.
They harvested incredibly specific telemetry on valve failures, thermal protection system weaknesses, and the crush core dynamics of the landing legs. The data harvested from SN10's death is exactly what guaranteed the flawless, explosion-free success of prototypes SN11 and SN15 shortly after.
So the losses are just data points. The explosions are clues.
That unpredictable rhythm, fail, 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 succeed, explode, succeed perfectly, is the actual beating pulse of modern innovation.
It's a functional manifesto. The quote from the internal memos hits it perfectly. If things are not failing, you're not innovating enough.
And that leads us to the ultimate paradox of system architecture. The only way to completely avoid catastrophic, unrecoverable failure in the long run is to constantly, deliberately embrace smaller micro-failures in the short run.
You have to pay the toll up front.
Without those early painful fireballs, there is no reusable booster reliably landing on a drone ship in the middle of the ocean. There's no satellite internet constellation. There is no viable path to Mars. Every single micro-explosion is a mandatory data-rich stepping stone.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? The synthesis of all this data, from the commodity pricing to the telemetry sensors, brings us to a very uncomfortable truth about high performance.
It does.
Most of us turn away the exact moment something blows up in our faces, whether that's a new product launch, a side business venture, or even just a difficult negotiation. We view the explosion as a signal to stop. But what if that explosion was the exact moment your progress actually began?
The difference between ultimate elite success and lifelong professional stagnation isn't raw intelligence. It's a matter of ego versus objective truth. It's about how much data you can extract from your failures before your ego decides it's too painful and quits.
So you have to reframe it.
You have to fundamentally relabel the word failure in your vocabulary. It's not failure, it's feedback. The elite performers don't worship success, they systemize failure. They strip the emotion out of it and turn it into a strict, calculated science.
So maybe your personal project hasn't taken off yet. Or maybe you've had a few massive, publicly embarrassing crashes recently. Based on the architecture we've discussed today, that is actually a very strong indicator.
Because it means you are actively trying to do something that is worth the friction. You're not sitting safely in the boardroom running simulations.
Which brings us to the actual application of this knowledge. Because mental ROI is completely useless unless it alters your behavior. So here is your final challenge. It is grounded entirely in the sources we covered today. Before you tackle that massive project or difficult conversation you've been actively avoiding this week, I want you to use the 2% rule.
Strip away the corporate bureaucracy, the social expectations, and the legacy best practices that are paralyzing you.
What are the undeniable, fundamental raw materials of the problem? Isolate just that piece. Tomorrow, design an approach, a conversation, or a prototype that tests only those raw materials. Expect it to break. In fact, design it to fail.
Go into it purely to harvest the behavioral data.
Stop protecting your ego and start collecting your data. Build, launch, fail, learn. That is how rockets fly, and that is how you build an undeniable competitive advantage. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.